The death penalty is a very controversial topic. Supporters say it makes criminals consider the fact that they could pay for a crime with their life, and therefore it acts as a deterrent. However, the vast majority of criminologists do not believe the death penalty actually works as an effective deterrent. Opponents of the death penalty say that it is immoral for the government to be able to decide who should live and who should die. However, many of them have no issues with the government giving such authority to the police and the military. Now, I don't want to go too heavily into the morality of the death penalty in this video, but the morality will be unavoidable. What I simply hope to do with this video is explain why I believe the death penalty is not unconstitutional in Canada. The last execution in Canada took place in 1962, when two men were hanged at Toronto's Don Jail. The next year, the government introduced a policy of commuting all death sentences, effectively ending the death penalty. However, it was officially abolished for civilian crimes in 1976, long before the Charter of Rights and Freedoms ever existed. However, it was not abolished for military crimes such as desertion until 1998. As such, the last death sentence handed out in Canada was handed out in 1976, and so the death penalty has never actually been challenged against the modern Constitution. However, I am confident that if the death penalty were to be reintroduced, that there would most certainly be a charter challenge against it. And there is a possibility, considering according to a 2013 Angus Reid poll, some 63% of Canadians actually support the reintroduction of the death penalty. Now, the two main points that I believe are relevant to the death penalty in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms are Section 7 and Section 12. First off, I'll address Section 7. Section 7 of the Charter reads, "Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice." Opponents of the death penalty will point to this section saying it guarantees the accused the right to life, and therefore it is unconstitutional to take that life from them. However, there is the exception at the end of this right, in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Now, fundamental justice can be a difficult term to define, really. However, it is societally acceptable to accept the idea that with the commission of a crime should come some form of punishment. As we already see now, we allow people to be incarcerated, which is obviously a violation of their right to liberty. Therefore, in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice, the government does indeed have the right to withhold an individual's Section 7 rights. This can therefore also extend to an individual's right to life. The government could, theoretically at least, under this argument, be allowed to withhold the right to life from an individual or violate an individual's right to life were it in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice of crime and punishment. Where there is a larger problem against the death penalty comes from Section 12 of the Charter. Section 12 reads, "Everyone has the right not to be subjected to any cruel and unusual treatment or punishment." Now, this is where the greatest challenge for the death penalty comes, because whether or not the death penalty is cruel and unusual is an inherently moral argument, realistically. Now, as for it being unusual, certainly historically it was not. The death penalty was enforced almost globally for quite a number of crimes. In the modern day, the death penalty is enforced in 58 countries, with the largest supporters in the first world of the death penalty being the United States and Japan. Given that there is also a 63% support in Canada for the reintroduction of the death penalty, one could say that it is not necessarily too unusual of a thing. Now, as for whether or not it's cruel, this is where there is more of an inherently moral debate. Most opponents would go and say it is inherently cruel, if not necessarily to the accused, then to their families, to execute someone, because the families have to deal with the death of a loved one. They also could argue that it is cruel to execute the accused themselves as well. Another possibility of what could be cruel could be potentially the execution method, and this could, of course, exclude a number of execution methods, most notably the electric chair and certain forms of lethal injection. Now, around most of the world, and in Canada historically, hanging was considered the most humane method of execution when it was done correctly, especially long drop hanging. Now, there are a couple ways to hang an individual, some more humane than others. One method is to simply tie a rope around their neck and hoist them up and strangle them to death. And that, of course, is not very humane at all, because the person suffers immensely while they are being strangled to death. The more humane method of hanging is to drop the individual from a height, usually done by opening a trap door of some kind. In doing this, their neck is snapped by the rope as they drop, and they are unconscious when strangled or potentially die immediately from the snapping of their neck. And this is actually the method Japan still uses for all of its hangings. Now, because the individual being hanged suffers no ill feelings as their neck is snapped, it's an almost instantaneous death there, this is the method that could be most likely argued to be the most humane method of execution, and therefore the most likely one to not be considered cruel to the individual who is being executed. However, as I said, it is an inherently moral debate, and there are people who believe that any method of execution is inherently cruel. Now, as I said, this is why I feel the death penalty is not unconstitutional, given the fact that I have presented some arguments from the side who would argue that it is. It should reveal a bit of my personal bias on the topic. I do not believe that it is necessarily inherently cruel to execute an individual for a crime that they committed, depending on what that crime was. Frankly, were it cruel to execute someone or to grant someone the authority to kill someone for a crime being committed, then it would be equally cruel for the police or the military to be killing realistically anyone. Now, granted, the police and the military do those in a matter of defense, in a matter of protection, and that is where my belief in the death penalty comes from as well, is that it could be used as a form of protection for society, because I do not believe the death penalty is actually an effective deterrent. But I also do not believe the death penalty should be applied lightly. At the moment, the threshold for a conviction for a crime is beyond a reasonable doubt. And what that means is that the jury or judge have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual committed the crime they are accused of. Frankly, for executing someone, I don't think that is a strong enough threshold. I do believe the threshold for the death penalty should be 100% certainty that the person up before the stand is undeniably guilty. And frankly, I don't believe a guilty plea by the individual should be considered enough evidence for this. There should be undeniable evidence that the individual committed the crimes they are accused of. I also do not believe, in general, the death penalty being used for the first offense. I do not believe that every person can be rehabilitated, which is the core principle of our justice system, is rehabilitation of criminals. And if there is an individual who has committed murder, and they have been shown that after getting out of the justice system, they went back and murdered someone again, that shows to me that this person is not capable of being rehabilitated. Given the fact that they already were released once and murdered again, that shows to me that their life is actually a threat to the lives of others, because it shows that they have a tendency to murder someone if they are let out. And that means that even if they are incarcerated for a life with no parole, which is currently not an existing sentence in Canada, the risk that they could escape from prison and murder someone still exists there. And this means that if an individual as that were to escape from prison, chances are very high that they would murder someone. I do believe that in such cases where an individual has undeniably committed multiple murders and shown that they will have a tendency to commit more, that such an individual is a threat to public safety, and that it is in accordance with the right to security of the person for other Canadian citizens for this person to be executed. Now, I do acknowledge that this opinion is not shared by at least 47% of Canadians. Sorry, at least 37% of Canadians, pardon my bad math. And that some Canadians, even who do support the death penalty, will disagree with me. And that's fine. I'm not saying that this is the be-all and end-all. I'm simply saying this is my opinion on something, and I am just one man. So, if you have anything you'd like to add or anything you'd like to say about this, feel free to post it in the comments section down below. I know people are going to disagree with this, and that is their right. I support that right unendingly. That is what a free country is all about. Now, as I said, were the death penalty to be reintroduced, certainly it would be challenged against the Constitution. And as I've stated some arguments against the death penalty, the judges in the case may very well decide to side with those arguments and declare the death penalty unconstitutional. However, they might also decide to declare it constitutional based on Section 1 of the Constitution and ignore its violations, or the government itself might decide to use Section 33's override that I discussed in my first video when they introduced the law introducing the death penalty. But of course, realistically, I don't expect it to happen. Even though there is 63% support from the public for the reintroduction of the death penalty, I don't believe that is enough support, and I don't believe that there is any real drive within Parliament to reintroduce the death penalty, certainly not with the current Liberal government that we have now. As I said earlier, feel free to leave any comments in the comment section down below as to whether you agree, disagree, or if you have anything else to add. Once again, thank you, or I don't suppose it is a once again, but thank you for watching this video. I am Chris the Canuck. I'm sorry that this is perhaps a couple days late. I can't guarantee the next one won't be as well, but I'll try to get it out sometime over the weekend. The next video, I am planning to analyze why I actually believe there may be a constitutional right to the ownership of firearms within Canada. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in next week.